Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to today's edition of ReTFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Billy Bob's Space Trucker and is part of a series. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Grand Superintendent Mylander stood on the bridge of the Gresland Dreadnought, Council's Pride. Water was too heavy and too unwieldy for them to fill a ship with it, despite being an aquatic species. But they had massive pools spread throughout the ship for downtime and getting out of their exosuits. For this reason, they had always built strong ships, and since they were the Council's main police force, it made sense that they'd have the bulk of the main fleet. The Krastikans were bogged down on their home system since they shared it with the Libertonians and their ongoing invasion of Bastion, so the invasion into human space fell to his kind. The humans had just sent a large fleet into Libertonian territory, and from what they could tell, that meant most of their fleet was on the offensive, or rather a forward defensive of someone else's territory. They'd soon learn the error of sparking a war with the Council. The fleet was on edge of human space. The FTL lanes ran through a brutal system they called Gemini, some sort of two-handed creature from their gnaw. The system itself had two stars spinning around one another, and he had no idea how they colonized a planet tossed between such extreme seasons. But they had no plans for land invasion. They'd brush aside orbital defenses, bomb the planet for a while, and move on to actual human colonies with land the Council could use. They were just one system out of Gemini, in a dead system called TR-231. There were some dead planets, an asteroid belt, but the material resources were minimal enough to make mining operations not cost-effective. The fleet was approaching the asteroid belt when suddenly the FTL field flickered and stopped. The ships groaned a bit, slowing down as the lanes vanished around them. Mylander looked around at his crew. "Report!" We're seeing total FTL gate failure across the sector, sir." "Impossible. There weren't any humans behind us. They couldn't have destroyed the gates." Readings indicate the gates are intact. They just, stopped?" That's not possible. Only the Council can control the gates. Fleet status." "All ships reporting in. No damage, sir. Should we take the defensive position?" "Any civilian traffic?" "No. Since the declaration of war, the space lanes into human space have been empty." "We're in a dead system. The humans aren't supposed to have much of a fleet left. They're just trying to slow us down. Send out maintenance crews to the nearest gates. Get them operational again." "What about an ambush, sir?" "What did I just say? They don't have more ships. Just get them out there. I don't even know how long it would take to reach human space without those gates." The average ship could travel at 10,000 miles an hour, fast, but nowhere near FTL fast. "There are some, minor readings in the asteroids, sir." "Minor? How minor?" "Maybe some small shelters, sir. No engines detected." Ignore them. Just some old survey stations before they realized the system wasn't interesting, most likely." What they didn't know was they were being watched from those asteroids. Rear Admiral Wayne was leaning over the shoulder of one of his tech to read the console. They were running dark at the moment, his defense station hidden amongst the rocks. "They're just sitting there." "Yes, sir. Looks like they're sending out maintenance team to one of the gates." "Fat lot of good that'll do them." "No defensive screen. Nothing, just travel formation." "Yes, sir. We have a clean shot on the 4 dreadnoughts. The flagship is currently screened by another dreadnought." "All right, we'll blow that one up. And then get the flagship. That's our primary objective." "Yes, sir." The Lucifer's Hammer was the latest American military station, built in secret and towed to an asteroid field. It held no less than 8 nuclear reactors, all of which went to powering the main gun. They hadn't figured out how to make the Death Star yet, but this wasn't bad. They could fire a chunk of special alloy 20 feet in diameter at 10,000 miles a second. That was about 5% of the speed of light, which was more impressive than it sounded. Especially when you see that it's 10,000 miles, every single second. It was the largest, most powerful gun America had ever made, and they were already trying to make something bigger and more powerful. Since the greater galaxy had the ability to move ships around through FTL gates for centuries, and they fought around important junctions while seeking to protect infrastructure and colonies, they had no desire to develop any such weapon. If they missed a shot, the possible collateral damage was beyond compare. But humans, and especially Americans, fought on their own rules. With their ability to sabotage the gates, and their ability to live out in empty stretches of space, they had the perfect opportunity. Back on the flagship, Grand Principal Malnder was grumbling and cursing as he paced back and forth on the bridge. The ships had reported in and were holding position. The dreadnought Thyron's Fury, just ahead of them, was holding position. The principal in charge was a veteran, and the ship itself was top of the line, though not as good as the flagship. It had armor 3 feet thick at its strongest, a crew complement of 15,000 including soldiers, some of the strongest guns in the galaxy, and had been tested in battle 23 times. "Sir, I'm detecting a sudden energy buildup in the asteroids. Is it an engine? I don't know. I'm not detecting an engine signature, but I'm seeing an energy spike in par with our entire fleet and 2 other dreadnoughts." Something in the field blinked, and suddenly the Thyron's Fury was splitting apart. "What happened?" the Grand Principal exclaimed. "What just happened?" The reactor is going critical, sir." They watched in horror as the dreadnought began to rupture and split, chunks of it exploding as the ship died. The oxygen was vented out immediately, and since they hadn't been at battle stations, none of the bulkheads had been in place before they were hit. The pieces of metal began to drift away from the center, where the reactor had exploded. Smaller systems rupturing as energy cells went critical, bodies floating in space. The water from their relaxation pools freezing and splintering in the vacuum. "Sir, hard evasive maneuvers. Start firing into the asteroid field." "We don't have a lock on any coordinates, sir." "Just open fire. Any rock. All of them. Start shooting back." The ship started to spin their engines back up, moving in a hurry now. "Look at that. Isn't that cute? They're trying to take evasive maneuvers," Rear Admiral Wayne said as he watched the enemy fleet finally start to move. They'd had to wait to the gun to charge back up before they could fire again, but there wasn't a chance in hell that the dreadnought could avoid a bullet traveling at over 10,000 miles a second. The fire from the fleet began to slam into the asteroids. It was mostly energy bolts, and a few missiles, plus much larger versions of what they called matter slammers. The rocks before them started to shudder and split under the fire, but they weren't focused. They were just cracking open the first layer of the rocks they could aim at. The humans were beyond that, waiting for the right moment. A few squadrons of fighter bombers were holding back until they had a signal to attack. Wayne knew they were severely outnumbered, even if the platform could wipe out their dreadnoughts in a single shot. Once the Xenos figured out their location, it was only a matter of time before they'd be destroyed. But the point wasn't to survive. It was to kick them in the nuts as hard as possible. He didn't really have time to give everyone a big speech, especially since the battle had already started. So instead, he gave everyone the green. Railguns began to spit a superheated metal at the Xenos. The fighter bombers started to pour out of the rocks and swarm over the closest capital ships. Special Space Marine boarding craft launched from the rocks, slamming into the smaller Xenos ship. The battle had truly begun as the Xenos tried to get into a better formation, while the humans shot at them from defensive platforms in the rocks. The Lucifer's hammer might be destroyed soon, but they hadn't found their position yet, so they took aim as the capacitors were finally ready. Wayne opened the channel to all humans in the area. "Well, I'm about to blow up their nicest ship, boys. When we all get to Tau, you have direct orders to start taking over. We've already stolen Devil's Hammer. We might as well start taking his land, too." He grinned as he looked out at the Xenos fleet. Their flagship was dead to rights. The Council's largest, most powerful ship. They bragged it could take a broadside from any dreadnought ever made and shrug it off. Well, that might be true, but the humans hadn't made a dreadnought. "Oh, and while you sorry shits are taking over hell, start making a statue dedicated to the fine American who started war with the rest of the galaxy." He pushed a button to fire as he said, "This one's for you, Billy Bob, Space Trucker." 365 degrees, burning down the house. Billy Bob was drumming as hard as he could on the invisible drums in front of him as Emily shook her head. "Why is he burning down the house again? Is it diseased or something? And couldn't they just clean it?"
"Emily, you should know this by now,
Most human music is not literal. It's full of metaphors and analogies and, bullshit. We're generally just singing about fucking or getting fecked up. And then some sports songs and war songs for good measures. Although one could argue that the war songs fall under getting fecked up. What about those blues songs? Well, generally they're about fecking, or being sad they haven't fecked in a while, or not fecking a specific person. Occasionally they're sad about other things. I was just using some generalizations. But there are a lot of songs about metaphors focused on the themes I mentioned. There are those literal songs, but they aren't very common. Although there's a good song about changing the name of a city. Once Billy Bob had laid claim to the Rosie again and gotten the Archangels off of it, the USS Predator had gone into attack mode. They attacked and destroyed a Krustakan ship, making a show of bombarding a tracking station on the planet, and then skipped off as the Council species tried to figure out what had happened. Getting Archangels onto planets wasn't hard. Getting them off was the trouble. So instead of taking the fight to the surface, they began to raid shipyards and orbital platforms. They all knew this wasn't going to be a quick war, so delaying production of new ships for a few months was more than worth it. Since the Archangels were doing their best to ruin the Xena infrastructure, the news had forgotten about Billy Bob and Emily. He had no doubt that the crabs were still looking for them, but they probably thought that they were on a carrier that had been running amok. So Billy Bob had the Rosie docked at Black Market Goblin Station, and they'd rented her out a room for the Galactic Week while they waited for the CIA to show up. He'd make sure to crank up the gravity in the Rosie twice a day and play around with Stomper so his muscles didn't atrophy or anything like that. Plus, he had fun playing around with the Space Fox horse. It hadn't grown too much since they got it, but he was still excited for the day that he could ride it into battle, although against what he had no idea. So they'd spent 3 days so far, hanging out in the room listening to music, or going to one of the station's restaurants, or just wandering around for the hell of it. He'd quickly become popular as a chef, teaching them how to properly cook human food for maximum enjoyment. Their supplies were limited now that the war had cut off the supply, or at least made it harder to get. Yet human food went a long way for most Xenos. Humans were incredibly dense after all, so what would be a tiny portion to a human was a feast for a Xeno. The few omnivores and carnivores that were civilized paid very well to get the incredible treats humans enjoyed. Billy Bob had been learning more about the Xenos in the last few days. Without constantly driving around and knowing he needed to recover from getting the crap kicked out of him, he had nothing much else to do. For example, he had learned the space goblins had been scavengers on their home planet, and had just started to explore the greater galaxy when the regulation war was in full force. As such, they were the only non-Council species allowed to trade in uninhabited sectors that were within Council space. It had been a quick fix to allow them to start trading while the fate of the galactic government was being decided. The Council founders had figured they'd join up once the war was over. But instead, the goblins just figured if the founders settled political disputes that way, they'd just remain neutral. And too many member species had started setting up trade with them for it to make sense to shut them down. So for the last few hundred years, they'd been living in a grey area of the law, founding stations outside of directly regulated and monitored sectors of the Council in order to trade freely. The Council wasn't thrilled, but it served a purpose in letting carnivores and omnivores get meat while keeping the hands of the Council clean. Aside from the Krustakans, of course, but the law was different when you were the secret police. Also, he found out that there were a ton of different ways species slept when they checked out the room and had to figure out what kind of bed to order. The space goblins, for example, slept in these padded chambers in groups. The Borks would sleep in more or less sitting up so their horns didn't gouge anything, but arranged in a circle so that they could keep their eyes on everyone else. The space ants the goblins used as guards had to sleep in complete darkness, with something covering them and joining by no less than 2 and no greater than 4 other space ants. Apparently, humans had incredibly simple sleeping needs compared to most of the galaxy. The same with Libertonians. He did discover that their beds weren't flat like humans, but they had a sort of padded ball, so when they slept in it, their wings would fit better and extend around their shoulders like a cloak. He'd been trying to keep a mental list of eagle things and raptor things with dealing with her. The appearance, he just considered a tie. The pointed beak was more like a dinosaur, same with the talons and claws and stuff, but wings and, mostly feathers, bird. So the sleeping thing was totally a nest, so bird. But she shredded and ate meat like eagles also ate meat, so it was confusing. She finally took off the survival suit on the second day to get it mended and cleaned, which was when he discovered that her downy coloring was besides her white hair. Feathers. Head feathers, shit. B-Robbo was struggling to figure out the terms in his head still. Either way, her head was white, and that ran down to around her shoulders before it turned black. And then she had blood red just along her forearms. She changed into what he could only describe as a loose grey vest, with 70s bell bottoms with Birkenstocks. She explained that their claws cut up many surfaces, so they wore special shoes to prevent that. At least she didn't wear socks. He never would have forgiven her. Although, the older he got, the more comfy socks and Birkenstocks sounded. With the bell bottoms, he didn't see what the coloring of her legs was like. He'd been avoiding any discussions about her anatomy like the plague, however, since he had no idea how to approach it. Her chest was sort of arranged like he'd figured it fit for a female. But she had a tuft of feathers around where he expected cleavage to start, so what was beneath the vest was still a mystery. Was she even a mammal? She wasn't cold-blooded, he knew. Without the cloak or the suit to hide under, he also discovered that she had a small tail, fin? Was it called a tail on a bird? Raptor? Feck! He was confused. When she'd caught him looking, she'd mentioned it was for stabilization, and he'd quickly changed the subject. He knew that she liked him. Aside from trying to cut his throat that one time, she did like to rest against him while they listened to music. That, and he caught her staring at him when she was awake during his own sleep cycle. He did like her bright purplish-pink eyes, though. That was cool. Sometimes she'd lean against him while they waited for food. She'd even go so far as to rub her cheek to his in public. But she mentioned it was strange for her to have to bend down to do so, which made him even more aware of the strange sensation that she was taller than him. B-Robbo just didn't know what to do. He wasn't a diplomat. He'd never really considered paying attention to Xenos in this sort of way until everyone told him that he damn well better. Whenever he did hear something about her species and affection, it always sounded like a surefire way to get torn to shreds for a human. He was much stronger than her, but his skin wasn't exactly protected from being torn to shreds by super sharp Space Eagle raptor talons. Did he dare even approach the topic? He'd been all but told that his country demanded it of him for the war effort. That was a whole mess of pressure that he'd never, ever expected to have applied to him. Maybe he should look up more about the Libertonians. But what if she looked at his extranet history and saw him looking up Libertonians doing it? If it weren't for all the alcohol he'd been drinking, he was confident that he'd be super stressed out. He was trying to explain to her some of the enigma that was talking heads when they both were startled by the sound of the room's comp screen beeping at them. He quickly turned the music off and turned it on. Yes? He was looking at a rather attractive woman with blonde hair and emerald eyes in some sort of sparkling green dress that matched her eyes. She smiled at him, flashing her white teeth. Colonel B-Robbo? Never expected to hear that, but yes. Who are you? Who else is looking for you this far into council space on the black market station while you shack up with your space bird, Eagle Raptor? The woman looked confused for a second as he shook his head. Never mind. You're with the CIA, of course. Well, what do we do from here? Some sort of secret meeting? We're in what can be considered friendly territory. Just meet me in the bar downstairs. I'd like to get a drink with you and talk things over. She smiled again as the feed went dead. He turned and then jerked in surprise as he found Emily standing literally right behind him. Ah! Who was that? You heard the call. That's the girl from the human intelligence outfit. Why was she dressed like that? It's a dress. Human women wear them to look attractive. Had he missed something? The trucker was confused. She turned as she moved towards the exit. She'd gotten her survival suit and cloak back, but hadn't put them on yet. She was still in that oddly retro outfit. Let's go speak with her so that I can set the record straight. What? B-Robbo was lost. If there was such a thing as a translator to translate female to him, then he'd be gladly pay at least one of his 10 billion credits that he was going to get for it. He followed after her, grabbing a jacket on his way out, so that he didn't look quite so redneckish in this usual plaid shirt. But as he went to grab his jacket, he saw Emily's gloves had been dropped to the floor. That meant that she was going out with her talons bared. He didn't understand why, so he quickly pulled the jacket on and moved to catch up with her. She was walking very briskly as she was already down the stairs in the hotel's bar where he found her. Then he saw the human woman with that sparkling bright green dress. She saw him and started to walk forward with a smile, one leg visible up to the mid-thigh through the slit in her dress. She extended a hand. "Billy Bob?" But before he could approach, Emily stepped between them. He was even more confused than earlier when he saw her wings spread out wide, as if she was taking up as much space as possible. Billy Bob couldn't even see the woman past her. But suddenly, her white wings shifted as he saw bright red feathers bared beneath the normal white ones. What was going on? Hello? He couldn't see what was going on, but the woman was looking up at Emily, towering over her, wings spread, talons extended out, the gossamer dragonfly-like wings in between her upper and lower arms shimmering in the light. Emily didn't respond, she just advanced slowly, one step at a time as the human backed up. When the CIA agent tried to step to the side, Emily snapped at her and quickly stepped to block her. "What's she doing?" she said, as the now whole bar was watching. "I have no idea," Billy Bob called out from the other side. Emily just let out a menacing raptor-like screech and advanced quickly as the woman squealed and backed up. Emily, what are you doing?" he said while following behind the Libertonian. "Why is she doing this?" "I have no idea." "Stop her. I don't know how." Emily advanced again and the woman shrieked as she was slapped with those big wings until she turned and ran out of the bar. Once she had done that, Emily turned to Billy Bob and saw even more of those bright red feathers bared beneath the white ones. She flapped her wings at him, and he backed up a ways. Then she turned, startling the patrons as she dashed forward, stealing a bottle of alcohol from the bar and 2 plates of food from nervous space goblins. She quickly handed them to Billy Bob, basically shoving them in his face until he grabbed them all, rather awkwardly, since he only had 2 hands. Once he had done that, she lowered her wings, standing to Billy Bob's left, as he felt one wing on his back and the other in front. She stared back at the confused human woman and called out, "Clearly I'm the better provider, not to mention my natural bright coloring is much more impressive. Even with your cheap color enhancement, he's obviously chosen his mate." Billy Bob nearly dropped everything in his hands then and there. "What?" was all he could gasp out. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob Space Trucker. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, Jon Creighton, W.R.E, 050, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.